healthy crowd here in the room, and we've got 37 people on Zoom. So at least I think we have a significant quorum. Okay, and the main and somehow I guess the projector bugged out, but we won't worry about that, I guess. The main purpose of this meeting is to have a panel discussion on the campus climate in terms of freedom of expression, academic freedom, and diversity of viewpoint. And I'm Bob Platt from the class of '73, and I've been very active at Cornell for almost 50 years now. And I hate to say that, in my opinion, talking to a lot of current students and so on, the situation is probably the worst it's been during all that time. And, you know, I think that there's a human reluctance to talk about problems that you don't know the solutions to. And so people don't talk about the problem because no one has an obvious solution to it. But I do think that if we just spend this next hour sort of sharing views and discussing the nature of the problem, you know, maybe we'll launch a discussion that in the long run might come up with solutions. The nature of the problem is evident by surveys, and Fire conducted a survey, the Knight Foundation conducted a survey, the Heterodox Academy just came out with a survey. And generally speaking, between like 80 and 84% of undergraduate students report that they do not feel free to sort of share their opinions and views. And that's sort of alarming, because I know when I was a student, you know, Barry and I would stay up half the night talking, and I probably disagreed with some of the things he said, and he disagreed with some of the things that I said, but I and all the other Cornell students felt very free to share our views and opinions and agree or disagree. It didn't have career-ending consequences or anything. We were just kids sharing ideas and exploring the human mind. And that, I think, would be tragic if it was lost from the essence of the Cornell experience. Fortunately, Cornell has identified 6 core values, and one of them is freedom of expression. And I think that's very important, because it is an academic freedom, which is very, very important and fundamental to any educational institution. I also think that it is really incumbent upon all of us, students, faculty, alumni, to really fight for this value and to try to encourage it. And it's really easy for students to do that, because they just sort of should sit around and talk to each other. We don't need anything special for that. Faculty tends to be a little bit more complicated, because a faculty member is both a juggler and a conductor of the orchestra, and trying to bring people out and get everybody, you know, sort of talking is a very difficult thing as a professor, because you're acting on this other group, the students. And alumni, it's even more difficult, because the alumni are, you know, probably 10 degrees more removed than faculty are. But we're the only group that really doesn't, you know, report to any supervisors. So it's sort of important for us to get involved and stay on the topic. So we're so fortunate to have 2 great guest speakers here today. We've got Barry Strauss, who's professor of history, and he's really more writing about the classics. If you want a good political thriller, read his books about Julius Caesar. When I was hitting middle age, 40 years old, struggling with my own athleticism, I was inspired about his book about learning to row at the age of 40. It was a great book. And he is really a very good guy with a great reputation for winning teaching awards and staying in touch with undergraduates. We should also have Richard Bensel, who's professor of government. He teaches a wide variety of courses. He even taught a course on conservatism. And he is particularly known because he's been very instrumental in the operation of the Cornell Faculty Senate. And so what I'd like to do is first turn over to Barry for a few introductory remarks, and then Richard, and then we'll have a little discussion.
Well, you might turn this,
Yeah.
so that,
There you go.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yes.
see this.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's great to have this opportunity to talk to you. I'll be brief. I just want to make a few points. First, it is a privilege to be a faculty member at a place like Cornell. I consider myself very lucky, very fortunate to have my career here. And if there are things that I think could be improved, please keep that in mind. That's my bottom line. Secondly, if there are problems with freedom of speech, they're not really problems for tenured faculty members. We are privileged characters, and I have never felt that anybody was telling me what I could and couldn't say. There are, of course, more popular things and less popular things to say, and things that will advance your career and things that won't advance your career. But that's true anywhere and in any institution. And again, I think the privilege of being tenured is quite a great one. I am concerned, however, about the students and the education that students are getting, because, well, to put it in a broader perspective, Cornell, like any university, is part of society. And society at the moment, as will be no surprise to you, is highly politicized and highly polarized. And universities, much as in many ways we are ivory towers and we're refuges, we're never completely ivory towers and never completely refuges. I'm a historian, so I have to give you an historical example. In the year 1871, Parliament passed an act that for the first time allowed people to become fellows and professors of Oxford University, for the first time since the Reformation, allowed people to be professors and fellows of Oxford University who were not members of the Church of England. That meant that before then, not only could Catholics and Jews not be professors or fellows of the Church of England, but neither could Methodists or Presbyterians or anyone else who wasn't a member of the Church of England. They took an act of Parliament to change this. Earlier, I think in 1854, they had allowed undergraduates who were not members of the Church of England in Oxford, but not until then. So the so-called ivory tower was never completely separate from society, and our ivory tower is no different today. And if you want to know why people are so wary about what they say at Cornell, only look at American society more generally. That will tell you something about it. Some other points that I'd like to make. That being said, universities have to be better. They have to be better than social media. They have to be better than the world of MSNBC and Fox News. They have to be places where people engage in reasoned dialogue and where people debate principles rather than personalities. And to a large extent, they still are those places. They still are today as they were when you were undergraduates here. But what's changed? Again, society in general makes people more wary of saying what they really think. I'm not at all surprised that undergraduates are wary about saying what they really think. Who isn't wary about what he or she really thinks in our society today? And to some extent, well, good for you. But to some extent, it's prudent to think about what you say. But there are some other problems. One, and this is something that Heterodox Academy, which Bob has mentioned, has brought out very well, and many other surveys have shown, is that the faculty at elite universities, and certainly at Cornell, leans very much in one direction. The faculty leans to the left and to the progressive left. That, I think, is pretty much to be expected in a university, and it's not in and of itself a problem. It only becomes a problem when it reaches numbers like 95% and 98%. Then it becomes a problem. What Heterodox Academy has argued, and I agree with, is that if you had a university in which you only had a minimum of 10% of the faculty who had different political opinions, then it would be much more open and there'd be much more debate for undergraduates. So I think that is really a problem. Secondly, I'm not convinced undergraduates are getting a good idea of what a university is for. I think the average undergraduate comes to university and thinks, oh, this is going to prepare me for a career. That's the impression they have. And it's hard not to have that impression, frankly, when you consider the price of tuition these days. But that's not what a university should be for. That's not primarily what it should be for. What it should be for is to get people to debate the great ideas and to come into contact with great minds and to come into contact with ideas that make them uncomfortable and make them rethink things. And that is impossible if everybody's singing to the same tune. And that's part of the bigger problem that we have at a place like Cornell or most universities today. Another thing I would say is that Cornell has a very nice statement about freedom of expression. But you know what? It isn't that nice. It's kind of clunky. It almost feels like it was written by a computer. It almost feels like they're just checking the boxes. There is a much better statement, and that is the so-called Chicago Principles, University of Chicago statement. It is frankly a magnificent and brief expression of what a university is for and what freedom of speech should mean. I would love to see Cornell, join. I think there are 80 some odd universities that have joined.
84.
84, thank you. That have signed onto this statement. And I think it would be terrific if Cornell would do that as well. I have to make a little pitch for my program. I run a program called the Program on Freedom and Free Societies. It is a little program. It's run on a shoestring, and it's partly because I have my fingers in a lot of pies. But we do make an effort every year to bring in speakers who might not be speaking in the way that most people think on campus. We try to bring in people from the center right. They don't have to be. We're not only bringing people from the center right, but we always try to focus on freedom. So this past year, for instance, we had Nadine Strawson of the ACLU, a formerly president of the ACLU. We had Jonathan Rao, she pronounces his name, of the Brookings Institution, who'd written a book, I think called The Constitution of Knowledge, about the role of experts and non-experts in free thought in society. And finally, we had a guy named Nuri Turkel, who is a lawyer and activist in DC, and who is himself a Uyghur, and who spoke about the repression of Uyghurs in China. This is a particularly important one, the third one that we had, because as some of you may know, there was an incident, Nuri Turkel came in April. There was an incident in, I think, February.
No, it was March 10th.
March 10th, okay, thank you. And I think you guys could probably do a better job than I can in describing what happened.
Well, it was a speech by a visiting congressperson.
Yeah.
And there was a question and answer session after it. And a graduate student who happens to be a Uyghur asked a question about Uyghur suppression and so on. And when she did, a group of mainland Chinese students walked up and left in a very disruptive way.
I can add some details. So she's a Fulbright student out of New Zealand. Her brother was in detention, had been in detention, I think, for 3 or 4 years, probably still is in detention. The program was the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs. It turns out that 48% of the students in that program are from the People's Republic. The program is very important to Cornell because it charges full freight. There's no financial aid, so it's almost all profit. The faculty is small. I have them in my classes because they're, and in fact, I'm subsidizing, when I do that, I subsidize the program. Cornell's reaction to what many people thought was it was mild, but that's the way things go. It was a mild sort of disruption, but they did call her names and that they were insulting. Cornell's reaction to that was quite muted, and it said both sides basically should agree to disagree and so forth. Remember, this is one student, 48%. This was a required class for SIPA. So all the students were supposed to be there. 48% of them from the mainland. So when you say agree to disagree and come together in a situation like that. You know the result is going to be. It was quite, yeah, it was quite demoralizing to many of us. We thought the reaction should have been, you don't do that here.
The irony of it is that the president of the SIPA Student Council was a mainland Chinese person. He tried to organize a document or letter condemning the Uyghur student, and that finally got shut down. But you know, it's sort of interesting how people try to use the institutions of governance as weapons of attack instead of weapons of defending free expression.
Wasn't there an effort also to oust the president of the Chinese students?
He was suspended. I mean, that's the last I heard. He was suspended but not removed.
As president,
Yeah.
not as a student.
Yeah.
Let me just also add one complicating factor is though we don't want there to be a heckler's veto. In fact, the courts have upheld that people have a right to walk out of a talk when they want to. They can walk out en masse and they can heckle and boo as they walk out. They have a right to do all those things, unfortunate as it may sound. So when we brought in Nuri Turkel in April, we had a Cornell policeman there. We wouldn't have dared do it without it. And we were prepared for an incident, but there wasn't, fortunately. You know, it all went off without incident. There were a lot of people in the room, 60 some odd, I think, and another 70 some odd on Zoom. So, and he was very eloquent, it was a great event. There were clearly some students there from the mainland, and I would say by the looks on some of their faces, they weren't real happy with what the speaker said, but no one was disrupted.
But you read a pre-canned.
I did. I started off reading a canned announcement as to the dire things that would happen to you if you misbehaved during this talk, and there had to be a cop in the room. But this has been going on for years.
Yes,
sort of
yes.
thing. You know, I remember maybe it was 10 years ago or something, Karl Rove gave a talk.
Right.
And for his talk, they brought out the big guns. It was some kind of dean or vice president or something who gave the canned remarks to the audience, and it went off without a hitch.
And when we were students, we had Marshall Key, who was a leader of South Vietnam, and he came and there were a bunch of hecklers led by an assistant professor of English, and there was a concerted effort to make sure that that professor didn't get tenure. I mean, we literally had trustees making statements to the press saying Professor so-and-so shouldn't get tenure.
It was a different era, though.
Yeah.
It was a different time. Let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, now, Barry said a lot of the things I said. So let me add some details and some more kinds of personal reflections on what this is the climate. Cornell, that's the climate. So I teach a course, a seminar, American Conservative Thought. It's the only such class at Cornell. And so the demand for the class is actually quite high. So I have a waiting list usually of 30 students or so, who, in addition to the 15 who are admitted, who want to come in. It gives me, as Barry says, you know, we don't often know exactly what students are thinking or what their experiences are. But it's for me, it's a really good window into those who want to hear, actually want to engage and debate on conservative as opposed to. Usually about 5 of the students, about a third of the class are liberals. And they come because they're curious, and they're actually more open-minded usually. I've had Marxists in there, but even the Marxists are more. Then in addition to that, usually 3 or so, and the numbers are fairly stable. So, you know, 3 or so are, don't know what they are, but they care. I mean, you have to care. To get into the class, you have to get up at 7 in the morning. You have to be first in line to register because it fills in 3 minutes. Usually the system crashes because and then it pops up and it's filled. So it's a kind of a random thing. So to get into the class, you have to care, and so forth. But they're more or less neutral. I usually have 1 or 2 very devout Catholics and sometimes some Orthodox Jews. This semester, I had more evangelicals than I've ever had. 3 of them in there, different varieties, more variety of evangelicals. And then I have economic conservatives. So it's a real mix. I've never had a fight in that class. I've never had, somebody so appalled by what somebody else was saying, they could not forgive them. There have been some tense moments where people discover other people's identity. Like somebody says, there are men and there are women, and there's nothing in between. And somebody says, I'm in between. That's a difficult moment. But we negotiate those. What I see through that class is the topics they cannot bring up anywhere else in the world. And as you might suspect, one of those topics this semester was abortion. Nowhere else at Cornell did they feel free or appropriate or whatever to discuss abortion. And turned out that when it was indirect. If the session wasn't on abortion, but when it came up, that's what they wanted to talk about. Spent 2 hours. Anyway, so a lot of my reflections come through that class. As Barry says, we're tenured, and nobody's going to tell us what to teach. I have mixed feelings about teaching this class because when I teach it, the administration points to it and says, hey, we got a conservative class on at Cornell, and that's enough. So I have this kind of feeling that maybe I'm doing it wrong. I'm not a conservative, by the way. I'm not a liberal. If you're curious, someday I'll tell you what I am, but I'm not any of those things. I teach that course because I believe those ideas should be on campus, and they should be given a hearing. And yeah, I've been doing it. I teach it every semester that I have room. Academic freedom. The statement on the academic freedom Cornell has was written by primarily written by Risa Leibowitz, who's the counsel for the American Association of University Professors.
The National Council.
National Council. Yes. No. She's up there. And I agree with Barry. I'd rather have the Chicago statement. We're lucky, I think, to get the statement on academic freedom that we did get. But I would prefer the Chicago statement. One of the big issues, very important issue on campus and in the faculty senate, has been whether this is not whether those of us who believe in it and strongly advocate that this statement on academic freedom apply to Cornell's adjunct programs in China. And we cannot, I've asked the president twice publicly, does it apply? I asked twice publicly the vice provost for international affairs. They refused to say. We know that it doesn't. We know that it could. That the programs in China are in fact in direct violation when students go there, whether they're Chinese or American. We have the same students there. When we send them there, they are in an environment where academic freedom is violated.
Every day.
Every day, well, we can just go on and on about that. We know China's like. The problem is getting Cornell to care. It's not that they're opposed. Barry's right about this. You know, and for most of us, most of the time, the statement on academic freedom as a guarantee of freedom of speech and be on the Ithaca campus, that's right. The problem is to get the administration to actually care about it. It's a different story. That's to make it one of the values that you support, that you enshrine, that you make as a hallmark of your institution. And that has been very disappointing. We had it was the day after, actually, your
Yeah, that's right.
we had we held a teaching on the on China, on Cornell's involvement in China and academic freedom. And yeah, so we've made the noises, we've done it, we've passed several resolutions in the faculty senate enjoining Cornell to bring these issues before the faculty senate for an hearing. And the central administration just refuses. And one of the things Barry was bringing up when he talked about depolarization in a larger society, now it's very polarized. I mean, you can see it every day. I mean, I get these free books in the mail. You know, there's secession, red and blue states, good idea. They want me to teach this in class or something. I don't know. But anyway, that polarization is really odd because, as Barry says, we're 98, 95% blue. You know, they're all red people. But it's as if many of the faculty students feel like they're fighting battles in the larger society at Cornell. So if somebody says, look, some of the people who oppose abortion actually have good normative principles they believe in that should be respected in a public debate. You say that, and you'll get trounced. Right? Now, whether that's academic freedom or not, it's just boring, is what it is. You know, it's disturbing. And yeah, they feel like they're fighting. I mean, these are good, reasonable colleagues, people, students, good heart, and so forth. But somehow they're earning karma by repressing any of this kind of dissent. That's what's intimidating. That's what you can't address through a statement on academic freedom. It's social relations. It's and people. And it's going to get worse if it could get worse. Once your institution has a reputation for being left, really left. They're the kind of faculty you recruit. They're the kind of students who come to your institution. You know, that's one reason for teaching conservative thought, because maybe some of those students who say, "Yeah, we can come and there's one course," but it's no, it's disturbing. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. Well, I thought it might be useful to just talk a minute about cures. I mean, Barry says adopt the Chicago principles, which is a very good idea. And you've said extraterritorial application of the faculty and now trustee statement that Reza wrote. I've got two more. One is we have 2.5 hours of DEI training as part of new student orientation. Why not add an hour of training on freedom of expression and viewpoint diversity, so that at least the incoming students will be told it's okay to be a nonconformist and to feel out the mental landscape. The other one that I think is very important is training the campus judicial panelists, the University Hearing Board, the University Review Board, on what is permissible speech so that they don't go around disciplining people for saying bad things. The one disappointing thing with Reza's statement, which was wonderful, was that by the time it got through the University Counsel's office, they added like about 4 or 5 lines at the bottom that basically said, and none of this applies if there's like harassment of individuals involved or you hurt their feelings or anything. So what good is free speech or a guarantee of free expression or academic freedom so long as it doesn't count if someone's feelings are going to get hurt, you know? And my caution to people like Barry who say adopt the Chicago principles is, if we took the Chicago principles and sent it to Cornell for adoption, right, they would add the same paragraph.
They would. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. But at least they would have a statement. I mean, the Chicago principles say, we expect part of your job at the university is to feel offended. You're supposed to be exposed to ideas that will make you uncomfortable, will make you think. And not that will necessarily indoctrinate, but will require you to think and to engage. That's why one of the things I like about that statement.
Well, there are 2 other things that Chicago does that really impress me. One is, as part of freshman orientation every year, they drag all the new students into the Rockefeller Chapel, which is something out of Harry Potter, you know, yeah, and they invite a very senior faculty member to give a speech on, you know, the meaning of college education. Right. And these are actually recorded, and some of them are very good. Mm-hmm. And so they get every student to focus on, why are you here? And you're not here to be brainwashed, you're here to become a critical thinker. And that's a very positive thing. The other thing that happened really back during the Vietnam War era was they adopted something called the Calvin Statement. And the basic idea behind that is that the university, because they are a community of scholars and people are supposed to be otherwise thinking, should not have the university take stands on the vast majority of issues. They can take stands on a few issues where they are, in fact, the consumer, but they shouldn't take stands on things like the Vietnam War or abortion or anything else. And one of the most annoying things, in my personal opinion, for what happens at Cornell is it's no longer an advocate for a viewpoint trying to convince the audience that my viewpoint is correct. Instead, your goal is to get the president of the university to agree with you and issue a statement saying you're right and everybody else is wrong. Of course, once that becomes part of the orthodoxy, what chance do you have for having meaningful discussion of the subject? So you end up having the student assembly pass a resolution demanding that the president denounce Jacob Gould Sherman for something that happened in 1899. You know, I mean, it's sort of like the kindergartners run to the teacher, to the principal's office complaining, you know, who ever gave the president of any university the right to tell me what's right or wrong, what I should believe or disbelieve? They're probably the least equipped person on campus to make those judgments. And yet that seems to be the current mode of political discourse at Cornell.
Yeah, the Uyghur student, when she asked a question, the congresswoman, her question was, why does Cornell condemn Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, but is silent on genocide in Xinjiang? And actually in the teach-in, you know, I brought this up. I said, look, either the university takes moral positions on everything, or should take them on none. And to condemn Russia without condemning China was to legitimate, which is, I think, the point. I'm actually in favor of the institution should not take positions. You know, what does it mean for the president to take a position? I'm not speaking.
I agree. I would only add that, of course, it's not just Cornell.
Right.
Many universities where the president feels that she or he has to take a position on the issues of the day. So it's pretty widespread. And as someone pointed out to me, it's the opposite of what radicals wanted in the 60s and 70s. I mean, they didn't care what the president thought. They wanted to occupy the president's office, and didn't want the president to agree with them.
Yeah, the truth in advertising, I was just kind of looking graduate stuff was happening. So we did not like leaving. It was.
Are there questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
So you wanted to talk a little at the end about, so what can we do? And I have a question for Professor Bensel, which is, given that there seems to be such demand, would you consider teaching a large lecture course on conservative thought at Cornell?
This is one of the things that comes up in my department. The way Cornell is set up, large enrollments has some kind of relation, not a direct one, with the number of positions in the department. So the department comes to me every once. This is really odd because most of them don't want to teach the course at all. But they look, you teach a big lecture class, so you're not 15 as 15 students. The problem is I'm not a conservative, so I can't get up there and in a lecture class, it tilts too much towards advocacy, and that's not what I want to do. So we used it. Formerly, 15 years ago, we had a Jeremy Ratkin, who was very conservative, Straussian conservative, did IR, foreign policy, and American constitutional law. Very popular, big classes, and he was tough enough to do that. I'm not as tough as Jeremy, but that's the kind of person I would like to hire in the department to do this. And he was tough. I mean, he would. Once at a faculty meeting, we were discussing candidates, and there's this space for race, and he said, "CA, what's that?" And somebody said, "California." But he was really tough. I mean, he didn't want race, and I mean, he's a Straussian. Didn't want race as a factor in hiring. But we don't have anybody like that now. By the way, I should also add that in my department there are 3 or 4 faculty members who are more or less, and I think more conservative, and they'll talk to me about these things, but not in a faculty.
I would say I have the same experience. Several colleagues who are more or less conservative, but not speak up.
Yes, sir.
So do you think that if you were to poll the faculty anonymously, guaranteed enough enemy, you would get a different number from that 95 to 98%, or do you honestly believe that 95 to 98% of the faculty means progressive?
I think you'd be slightly different, somewhat different, but not hugely different.
You get some people to actually really believe it. I mean, this kind of, we're professors, we talk all the time. We're meant and tended to give our ideas, our opinions, our judgments in public all the time. By the time you have tenure and been around in even junior faculty, you learn button up any opinions that do not fit in the social environment. That becomes really, really ingrained. I think it distorts actually the personalities of those colleagues who have to have that self-discipline. It's very real. And in the government department, I think this is right still. There is not a single registered Republican.
And I think that's really where the data comes from, that the Sun did a study of all the Cornell faculty, and where did they donate? Because if you donate more than $100, it's reported to the Federal Election Commission. And it was like 95% of the faculty donors were Democrats and like less than 5 were Republicans. And similarly, you know, Cornell faculty who have been active in local politics have been active in the Democratic Party.
Right.
And a lot of them have served in the administration of Democratic presidents, and very few have served in like, you know, the Trump administration, for example. So that's the data. Yes, Jay.
Is this because no conservatives apply to become faculty members of Cornell, or because all the conservatives that apply to Cornell are rejected or denied?
Yeah,
You go first.
but they show up, I think, more, their political leanings are revealed more in the Department of Government than most departments, because it is politics, it is policy, and so forth and so on. In the academy in general, and Barry hinted at this, in the academy in general and in the elite level, there aren't very many. The area in which in the Department of Government and in American politics, almost none. Comparative politics, you'll get more variation, but not the real area where you can find good, solid, respectable conservatives is political theory. And it's often in the early republic, history of the Constitution, political history of the Constitution, and so forth. When they come up, and I've advocated this over and over again, when they come up in a search in political theory, the department says, and I think they're sincere about this, the whole department sits around a table, says, well, you know, it would be good to have a conservative on the faculty. And I said, yeah, you make your ideas tougher. You know, you have somebody to respond with, you engage with. And they say, yeah, but not in my backyard.
Barry,
And-
sorry, go ahead, finish. Barry,
Yeah,
you want to comment?
I would say it's not the case that people apply for jobs and they get dinged because they're conservative, but rather more that the jobs are defined in a way that conservatives are not likely to apply for this position. And there's I wouldn't say it's people saying not in my backyard, not in my experience, but rather there are a limited number of positions and they want to hire people who are going to be in their school of thought and it'll be useful for them building up their shop. So it's not a priority for most faculty in my experience to say, I want someone who's really different from me, because it'd be great to have someone who I can bounce my ideas off. I mean, for me, it's really been useful to have, you know, so many colleagues who are on the opposite side of the aisle from me politically, because I've learned from them, and it's valuable. But I don't think that most people think that.
Well, I guess the other thing I want to add on this is that in the social sciences, I think your personal political philosophy does play a role in your academic persona, but in the hard sciences, it really has zero to do with it. And yet, by requiring faculty to write a DEI statement when they apply, you open up that whole area of inquiry, which is really normally not relevant. And that's where it becomes a problem. And because of that, a very promising scientist who has to decide, do I want to go to academia or industry, will say, well, I'm not going to get that mess. And they go off to industry instead. So that's how the selection happens. Yes.
So as a student, I took a course with voting. Seemed to me the point of that was they had two people from different parts, different sides of the aisle. Right. And they expressed their views and got the whole student body to have debates about that.
Right.
So first of all, should we do that more? Could we do that more? Would that be part of the benefit, making it intentional?
We should definitely do it more, but I don't think we could because we don't have the people to be on both sides of the debate, or it'd be difficult. You have to bring them in. I mean, that's what we try to do in my program, to bring people in from the outside who will at least speak to this. I wouldn't say that Cornell is the most extreme case, but it's certainly towards an extreme end of the university. You can find other universities that are not quite so extreme, kind of different word, unbalanced as Cornell is, but there are days that are even less balanced.
I guess the reason for my question is, if we said as a university, our goal is to present the debate. We intentionally said our goal is to present the debate. I think the Lefevre came here because of that opportunity. I don't know.
Lefevre came before Lowy. Lowy came like in 1972 or 1973. Yeah, but okay. Well, we do have a couple of questions.
They play poker together.
Yes.
This wasn't. This was staged in some ways. Lowy was my bachelor mentor at Chicago and also on my doctoral committee at Cornell, so I knew him well. I didn't know Walter.
We do have several questions from Zoom, if I may pose them. One is, it says, if Cornell wants more diversity of views among its faculty, will it have to actively encourage such and actively recruit people with these diverse views, letting the individual departments select newcomers who look and smell like the incumbents is passing the buck and a cop-out? That's what the viewer says. Does anyone have a response?
It's not really a question.
That's not really a question.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a couple of more. Every company has a speech no-go zone for employees. At Starbucks, Amazon, it's union talk. And the speakers list some of Cornell's no-go zones or topics. And you said abortion, for example.
Yeah, abortion is one. Race is another one. Right? Let me give you an example. So, Straussian political theorists believe in the concept of a citizen. What's the French concept? Stripped of all identities. The orientation towards the good is a collective one. It's a collective enterprise, and so forth and so on. Straussians then condemn. They're not shy about this. They condemn all of identity politics. You can't do that. You cannot touch it. So, as a principle of democracy, a pursuit of a political good, and so forth and so on, you cannot you cannot voice that position. And that covers a lot of territory. Barry was talking about job descriptions. Straussians, you have to be really intentionally reading through it in order to get them.
You'd really have to want to make intellectual diversity, freedom of speech and debate. You have to be your priority. And it's just not. Sadly, it's terrible, really terrible. What university is supposed to do that.
I just want to add a little bit on that. I didn't want to look on play. We just had work on identity politics, but it was very critical about, the sort of role that identity politics has come to play in American education. So,
But he published it in French, so he could get away with it.
friends that he wrote articles in the Harvard magazine.
It's true, he did. He's been very brave in that stuff.
So
And
just I think some people
yes, and talking about our colleague Laurent Dubois in the Romance Studies department.
Yeah. Good friend.
Yeah, he's great.
Yes,
I
sir.
also had two questions on the discussion. The first one is, to what extent do you think this chilling of free speech is driven by a very vocal and influential minority versus like kind of the majority of folks? Because you mentioned, you talked to the colleagues who are remote and just afraid to speak up. You mentioned students in classes that they're popular and has a lot of interest. And what I also feel, just in a personal experience, when you talk to people in small group settings, one-on-one, they tend to be fairly reasonable, but when things are channeled through social media, people are much more aggressive, unforgiving, and almost like a little bit inhumane in how they're treating other people because they're not interacting with the person, interacting with the symbol. So that was my first question. The other one around remedies is you discussed sort of micro-level remedies of the questions, the policy at Cornell, it's to sort of change hiring. But the problem really is macro levels in society. And it also seems like Cornell doesn't respond, unfortunately, to principles, but they respond to incentives. On the China film, for instance, the incentives are very clear, fortunately. So it's part of the remedy to maybe get at some of those incentives of how do we influence like enrollment and make this more, change the enrollment policy or influence like trustees or, pull up the incentives more than the principles to further the principles. And those two, one on how, where's the problem coming from, two, how can we pursue more like macro level incentive driven remedies?
I mean, those are great questions. My instinct would be to work at the micro level. I don't think it's going to be possible. I think it'd be very, very difficult to change things at the macro level. But if you can make some small changes at the micro level, I think that would have an effect.
There's give you an anecdote and see how far this is going. I was a member of the campus committee on the campus code, and we held public hearings because we were revising the code for students. And in one of those hearings, it was sparsely attended, 20, I'm talking about minorities, 20 students or so for undergraduates. And a group of the students said, look, in the campus code, there should be a provision that all syllabi and all courses at Cornell be reviewed for appropriate speech. And there was no opposition in that session. No one said, you can't do that. That's a violation of academic freedom. That's a professorial autonomy and so forth and so on. These things in public, they're very extreme. It's not,
Well, there's this thing called the Overton window, which is sort of the spectrum of permissible thought, and anything outside the window is like, who cares, that's silly. And what's really happening is the people who consciously stretch the Overton window, many people would argue toward the left. So all of a sudden the activists for the indigenous students say, Cornell should give all this land back to the Cayuga Indians, And normally that would be considered something so outrageous that no one would actually put that in writing. Yet they do it deliberately because they want to shift the window. And I could come up with 100 examples like that. So even though you're one or two activists, by deliberately trying to shift the window, you're allowing the vast silent majority to be viewed as agreeing with you. Another question from the audience, please.
So,
Yes.
so where do we go from here? So if it's almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you have, you've got the school attracts, sort of liberal-minded students. The faculty is completely 95–98% progressive liberal philosophy. Where do we go from it?
I wouldn't say the students are 98% liberal.
No, I'm not saying that they are. I'm just saying you seem to be. You said earlier, I think one of them said
public voices.
I would say that maybe 20% of the students are conservative.
Well,
I guess.
I do voting studies. And so one of the things I did is analyze votes for president in the precincts around Cornell since the founding of the university. And up until the 1970s, the Cornell community, in those precincts right around, some students, a lot of faculty, staff, and so forth, were more conservative than the country as a whole. It was really remarkable. During the Great Depression, they never voted for Roosevelt, even in 1936. Okay? In the last two elections, 90 2% of all of the votes cast in the precincts around Cornell were for Democrats, 7.5% for Trump. Now, Trump's a hard sell in universities. It's a very hard sell. I mean, he's, in addition to being diverse, he's just anti-intellectual. So it doesn't go over well. So it's probably higher than 7.5%, but it's not high.
But some of the students vote in their home. They have both have to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have another online question that I do want to squeeze in. This probably is right up Professor Bendel's line. What about the profound consequences of Cornell's undue financial reliance on Chinese tuition, including any preference for nationals in admissions decision? How does reliance on Chinese tuition impact political discussions, the social fabric of campus life, and involvement of alumni? Does Cornell's relationship with Chinese government benefit U.S. society as a whole?
The arguments that are made in favor of Cornell's involvement in China revolve around that Cornell's exposure to Cornell faculty and to Cornell institutions is liberalizing. And I'm sure compared to the mainland China, that's right. The opposite way is that it is incredibly corrupting to Cornell to sell your reputation to an authoritarian, totalitarian regime and to accept the restrictions on freedom of thought and freedom of expression that go with that. So that's a cost. And then the other part of it is, why does Cornell's in bad financial shape. It's been in bad financial shape since at least the 2008 financial recession. But I think the Cornell Tech expansion, this is my guess, we never see dollars and cents on this, but the Cornell Tech expansion in New York City hasn't gone the way they thought it would in terms of finances. If you look at the Cornell campus in the liberal arts side, not the professions, not the business school and so forth, but look at liberal arts and some of the social sciences, they're being starved. And the starvation is really, Barry lives in a building that's held together with Scotch tape and baling wire.
Yeah.
And that's been true for, I don't know, a decade or something. And Goldwyn Smith well, you can go through, I'm not going to belabor this. But the arts quad is actually being starved in this. Cornell needs that money, and China will give it to us. In the dual degree program that was first offered, proposed to Cornell, they guaranteed Cornell $400,000 profit in the first year and $1 million every year afterwards. And we know this because when it was brought to us by the hotel school, the spokesperson said, this is a major reason why we should do this. And we said, if they're guaranteeing this money, aren't they just buying? And different academic programs, when they run on finances, depends on students showing up, paying tuition, wanting to be there and so forth. These were guarantees. It's like buying your name in a football stadium. It is really crass.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only thing I can say to put in perspective is Cornell is not alone.
That's right. It's not-
Stanford gives us a run for our money. Many other places.
Right, but we want to be a leader.
Yeah, I agree with you. No, I'm not justifying, I'm just giving perspective.
Yes. Yes, Mike.
We talked a little bit about cultural versus economic conservative. So you referenced your studies, and I'd love to have a debate on that because the 1936 election was about the economy, and the 2020 election is about social issues, and nobody gives a damn about the economy, really. So there's no fight on that front. So this world of what a conservative is shifted pretty dramatically in my view. And I think the fights are on the social front. Trickle down economics, nobody even talk about it. Nobody cares. It's replacement theory, it's critical race theory, it's all those kinds of issues that have animated the conservative voting population. It doesn't seem like it's an intellectual debate the same way when we're discussing economic theory. That to me personally just seemed like a more intellectual based orientation rather than, gee, I just don't like people who don't look like me.
Just some of the readings in this conservative thought class, that address these kinds of issues, but they have to deal with things like what should a criminal justice policy be, which is grounded in assumptions about human nature, whether people, he believes that some people are just naturally bad. And I think if they're naturally bad, then after they've been arrested 2 or 3 times, you just log them up. But those are debates. They're debates fundamentally about human nature and the consequences from making assumptions one way or another. So you're going to have intellectual debates. Not that they come to a conclusion, but I think a lot of the economic debates don't come to a conclusion either. But you're going to have debates on these issues. It's quite intellectual. They have to do with the consequences of the assumptions you made for your politics, which is what we do in the class.
The one other question was online that was very stimulating, which I thought I raised with you is, obviously in the Department of Government, you have conservatives as a first viewpoint, but it seems to me that in any area of academia, you have diversity of viewpoints on millions of different issues. Is there anything Cornell can do institutionally other than bring in guest lecturers to ensure viewpoint diversity beyond just government?
Well, yeah, it could start an initiative to hire faculty it could start an initiative to first of all, value debate and intellectual difference, and then to hire faculty to do that. I think it'd be very difficult to do that. It would be, first of all, very expensive. Secondly, there'd be a lot of opposition among the faculty, a lot of opposition.
To hire someone to argue with you.
Yes, because they just don't value that.
The usual way you do this, if you attempt to make a difference in your campus culture, is you form a center.
Yes.
And you give it a lot of money.
Right.
And they hire faculty who do this thing. And Cornell does that on the left over and over again.
Yep.
Sustainability, anti-racism, we've got centers all over the place.
Where, in my opinion, you don't need it. But on the right, for conservatives, whether it's, you probably could do it for economic policy, but then you'd be looking like the economic department anyway. So yeah. But for cultural issues, I think it'd be incredibly hard, even if you could get it set up, to hire people who would sustain it in this kind of dedicated, sincere way. The people doing the hiring wouldn't believe in it.
That's right.
There just aren't enough of them.
It would have to require central direction. It would be probably someone from Day Hall, people from Day Hall, that would say, "This is what we're doing, and we're going to make it happen." And too bad. There'd be a lot of opposition.
And you don't want that, by the way.
No, you don't.
Who'd
want to come? Who'd want to be in this?
Who'd want to come? You don't want a faculty being hired by Day Hall anyway.
No, you don't.
So the problem in setting up this center is that you just don't have the threshold to do it.
Do you gentlemen have the pulse of the donor base, university's donor base? What sense do you get out?
Well, the one data item we have is something called Cornell Giving Day, which raised about $12 million for 500 different causes. Each one was promoted in a very appealing way. And so it's like drive-by donations, okay? And of the $12 million, more than half was for athletics. And if you really look at, like, there was $1.5 million for the Arts and Science College, of which only 6,000 was for Africana Studies. There was more for, like, the Walter Lefevre Scholarship. It really, as has been said, if it was up to alumni donations, woke would go broke. And that's the one public data item we have. Anything else in terms of giving patterns is largely the result of cultivation and strategies of the development office, which we're not privy to, and it's a very opaque process. But hopefully, if you're blessed, like I hope Barry's program on freedom and free societies becomes blessed, then the donor dollars will find their way to you. But so that's it. I think we're really getting past the time. So I do want to first of all thank our two sponsors, the Cornell Review and the Cornell Free Speech Alliance for making this possible. I want to thank both Professor Bensel and Professor Strauss for joining us. I think this has been very valuable. We do have literature in the top front of the room if you haven't picked it up already. And I really want to thank you all for taking an hour to reflect on this. I hope you take the message home and talk to other Cornellians about it, because it's a problem that needs a solution, but that no one seems to have the instant solution. Thank you once again for coming.
Thank you all for listening.